What do we find at the intersection of faith and the world? Our new podcast, Crossroads, explores this question in thought-provoking conversations featuring guests from around the world who are seeking to live faithfully in the public square. This is a safe space to discuss politics, technology, and our responsibilities as citizens. Pull up a chair and meet us as we search for a better way forward. Welcome to Crossroads, where we discuss the intersection of sacred and civic. I'm your host, Nygard Owens. Well, today, friends, we have a treat. I am sitting down with my colleagues, Provost Jan Cope and Canon Missioner Leonard Hamlin, to talk about the ecumenical and interfaith nature of the cathedral. If those words don't make sense to you, don't worry. We will unpack them as we go along. Welcome, Jan, and welcome, Leonard. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much, Joe.
And for those of you listening with us, you might know that we say where we're joining from. Well, part of the treat is that we are all sitting in the same room here in D.C. So it's a joy to have a face-to-face conversation in the same room. The cathedral has been so wonderful to hire clergy from different faith traditions. We call that ecumenical. As you know, I am Presbyterian from the PCUSA denomination. And Leonard, tell us about you.
Certainly. I'm Baptist, Congregationalist, ordained in the National Baptist Convention, a member of the Progressive National Baptist Convention as well.
Oh, fantastic. And Jan?
I'm an Episcopalian.
And many people who come to the cathedral don't realize that National Cathedral actually is an Episcopal cathedral. We've had all sorts of folks come in, right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, one of the blessings of the cathedral is we welcome people from across the country and around the world. And obviously, they come from many different traditions of faith or no faith, and all are welcome.
No, I think, being here at the cathedral, the exciting part even today is that we're in the same space. The fact that we're able to sit down together and come together, it's modeling for others in these days and times, the kind of work that needs to be done. And the cathedral, under the leadership of our dean, has been seeking to do that in these days and times.
But not just in these days and times, right, Jan? I mean, you have some amazing stories of the ecumenical and interfaith nature of the cathedral from long ago.
That's right. And I think it's helpful for people to know that the cathedral was actually created by an act of Congress in the late 1800s and always intended to be a church for national purposes. And how that lives into being current is really what the trends are at the time. Back in the late 1950s, then Dean Sayre of the cathedral welcomed several different worshiping communities who were in the process of building their own churches, and in one case, a synagogue, to worship at the cathedral. So in 1958, if you'd been at the cathedral on a Sunday, you could have heard at one point during that Sunday morning a Russian Orthodox congregation worshiping in Old Slavonic, a Ukrainian Orthodox church worshiping in Ukrainian, a Polish National Catholic Church in Polish, and a Syrian Orthodox church worshiping in Arabic. If you came on a Friday evening, we welcomed Temple Sinai, who worshiped in Bethlehem Chapel for several years until their synagogue was completed. And so I think it underscores our sense of being a house of prayer for all people.
That's incredible. I had no idea that all of those different worshiping communities worshiped here.
I think it's a testament that it's really in our DNA, our spiritual DNA, to be welcoming, not just in terms of ecumenism, but also interreligious and interfaith and no faith.
It's helpful to know the history. I was surprised to even hear some of that myself, having been here for a little while now. But to have a space where everyone knows that they're welcome becomes important, and that you're able to practice and be accepted. And so I'm grateful that individuals will be able to look at not only the history, but able to look where we're going and where we're trying to take, I think, community in our conversations in the future.
So the cathedral has given space, but we also seek to work with others.
Certainly, I think we can all have our individual space, and there's a positive to that. There's a benefit, as we all know, at times to focusing in on how you might have your own expressions. But shared expressions allows us to be able to experience something even beyond what we would call the expected, to experience the unexpected, to have the kind of moments that we may use in these religious terms that we talk in terms of revelation, being able to see further than what we see. I often say, hear more than what we have heard, so that we can do more than what we've done. That's the important part about coming together and celebrating our differences, even in our expressions. And sharing this space, it is a wonderful gift that the cathedral has offered and continues to offer, of how we share space together and convene with each other.
And I would also say, picking up on that it's all about relationships. The cathedral's been very intentional in reaching out not just ecumenically, but interfaith. And whenever we're hosting large national services, like an inaugural prayer service, the various faith traditions in our country obviously would be represented in something that's a big national service. And so our worship department, our music department all work closely with our friends from the Jewish tradition or practitioners of Islam and many other different faith traditions. And it really is about our friendships and respect for one another that enable us, when we have something quite unexpected come up, like our recent service for the humanitarian aid workers who were killed in Gaza, who were members of World Central Kitchen, and the desire that it represent the Abrahamic traditions. We weren't starting from scratch. These are our friends with whom we come together on matters of faith and matters of our nation and more globally. And I would also say that it works both ways. When the cathedral suffered a significant earthquake in 2011, obviously, the cathedral had to be shuttered, and as it turned out, for several months. One of the first people who reached out to the cathedral was the senior rabbi of neighboring Washington Hebrew congregation to offer their worship space on a Sunday. I mean, where else would you flip a large, Christian congregation on a Sunday? And as the senior rabbi said, we don't use our sanctuary on Sunday. You're welcome here. And it wasn't just opening their space. The welcome included bring what is authentic to your worship, whether it's cross, communion, etc. It's an experience. We were there 5 weeks that I'll never forget.
That's really beautiful. And if you didn't know this history of these partnerships and community building, something like World Central Kitchen could look performative. We're just having people up on the platform from different traditions because it looks nice. No, these are real relationships that we've built. And so it was very natural to call up the rabbi and the imam and those and have them come and be a part and to include their prayers in the service and different voices.
Joe, I think what you are, of course, pointing out, and Jan was alluding to, is that the key to that is making real relationships and friendships. Hearing her talk about it today, it is what helps us to really get the work done, to foster strength in our communities and respond in moments of crisis. As we know, the cathedral has in its mission that we would be a place of convening in those moments of crisis. But coming together and just meeting each other initially, that can take place. But what a joy it is when you can come together and there's established relationships that you can build upon.
And if I can give a shout out to my two colleagues, Leonard and Joe, you both took that opportunity of gathering at the World Central Kitchen service to invite your friends from ecumenical partners and interfaith partners so that it was really all of us coming together.
Yeah, I was excited as well, Joe. What are your thoughts in being here as well?
When I was first looking at this position, I wondered, would they ever hire a Presbyterian from Cleveland? And of course, it never hurts to ask. So I reached out and asked, and sure enough, they hired a Presbyterian from Cleveland. Those who have heard my faith story know that I consider myself to be a Presbyterian. Married to an Episcopal priest, so I have at least some familiarity, but even that familiarity did not prepare me for the cathedral, the true experience of the cathedral. And I just want to say that I've been blown away by the welcome, that the Presbyterian side of me is welcomed and embraced and encouraged. When Randy said to me, "Oh, wear your typical preaching robe when you preach on Sundays," I just couldn't believe it. I thought I would need to be a chameleon to dress the part, to look like everyone else. But he said, no, it's okay to be yourself. In fact, we really want you to be yourself, and hopefully someone else will see themselves in you.
And Leonard, you've taken the same track.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm listening to Joe now, and even in my response, I probably had the same, almost identical initial response. What you mean? You're welcoming a Baptist into this place, and coming in and then finding the joy of working with the colleagues that I have, meeting Jan, of course, initially, and the others subsequently to our introduction, of how welcoming the space really is. And also, too, the commitment to do the kind of work that needs to be done, and do the work with excellence.
Right. And as a side note, I think I gravitate toward you, Leonard, at times, just because we are the different ones. So it's nice to have someone else who is not as immersed in the Episcopal culture, who sees it with different eyes, who sometimes sees the extra layer of beauty because it isn't familiar, or a little bit of a layer of strangeness that this is not part of what I grew up with and what I was trained for. Speaking of training, you both went to ecumenical seminaries. I would love to hear about that experience.
I graduated from Howard University, and I enjoyed my experience at Howard. Some would go and find it challenging when you go to an ecumenical and really broad curriculum-based seminary. What I really saw as a need was being prepared to deal with the world as it is, going in and having conversations and being able to move through those conversations. So attending Howard was a wonderful experience for so many different reasons that would take up probably much longer than, of course, that we have for this morning. But I looked forward to that, and I'm thankful for that looking back now.
And in my case, I know what it's like to be an Episcopalian. I've done that all my life. And so choosing to go to Wesley Theological Seminary was intentional on my part. It's Methodist-based, as one might, surmise from the name of the seminary. But in truth, there are 30 different denominations represented within the student body at Wesley, and it made a much richer experience for me. I would never have, for example, been in a preaching class with a Unitarian Universalist and listened to how they would have to frame a sermon in a not Trinitarian Christocentric context, and talking about the sanctity and the sacredness of time. I mean, there were so many things that I learned by being with others who come from a slightly different tradition, and I would hope that I'm much the richer for it. And I would suspect that it's also enabled us to be a little more knowledgeable as we seek to serve those within our own community who come from many different walks and many different places and traditions.
When it comes to planning worship, Rose, our canon for worship, is so intentional to have all sorts of representation up on the platform, whether folks know it or not. And sometimes that comes out in our music, sometimes that comes out in our liturgy, sometimes that comes out in the color robes that we're wearing. How do we show all the different sides, all the different flavors of our faith through our worship, through our morning prayers, through anything that we are sending out into the world. How do we bring all these different pieces of ourselves and who the staff is, who we welcome in for special services? How do we show that to the world?
Well, I'm thankful you bring up that it all begins sometimes out of our worship. I'm thankful for our canon of worship and all of the different elements that are included within our worship experience. You have spoken to the symbols, the signs, the expressions in different ways. I often am given an opportunity to speak to many of the visitors who visit the cathedral. And I'm often saying to those as well as others that there are many times we're all trying to say the same thing, but we're just using different expressions, or we're saying it in our own unique expression. Will we have the patience with one another? Will we have put in the work to be able to understand the language that we're using? Because even in our expressions, we have these terms, we've been using them here, a lot of religious language and big, heavy terms. We've been using those terms, but they're all trying to say something. And even in our symbols and expressions, they're saying something as well. So how do we interpret for one another and help each other to get to that middle ground? I run into individuals, and I say this so many times, that we celebrate those who can speak multiple languages. We find them gifted in a way. But for someone who's able to move between the language of faith and the expressions of faith, who can serve as interpreters for others to help us build that middle ground, that's a wonderful gift that I think we all ought to be working on to help each other, to build this space that we can share, even while we may be accustomed to speaking one more than other.
I'm reminded, Joe, of another event that took place at the cathedral, which I think crystallizes for me part of the question you're asking in Leonard's wonderful response. Years ago, when Nelson Mandela died, the South African embassy came to the cathedral to ask if we would host the service for the United States, which of course we were honored to do. The ambassador at the time, Ambassador Rasool, was also an imam. And as he was walking the space with our then canon for worship, he was imagining not just that service, but what might their Friday prayer service look like in the cathedral? And would we consider hosting something like that? Which we did. I will tell you, it was quite controversial at the time with some of our friends in the Christian community. It was held in the North Transept, so you didn't have Christian iconography that would make that more challenging. And Ambassador Rasool spoke that day really about the larger issue of what we share, the things that unite us, as opposed to the things that divide us. And I think it's fundamentally our hope that everyone can see themselves somewhere in the cathedral, that it's not just physically large enough, it's the sixth largest cathedral in the world, but it's expansive enough in our welcome, in our ministry, that anyone who's open can experience the sacred and the holy in a way that's meaningful to them.
Thank you. You said exactly what I wanted to say, that it is my hope that everyone can see themselves there. And I have certainly found that to be the case from the moment that you step foot in the space. The Gothic architecture draws your eyes up, and there's this sense of belonging. And it is the hope that all people feel that sense of belonging there, no matter their faith tradition or no faith tradition, that they feel at home. And as visitors walk around and they encounter clergy and staff members, to a person, our staff is so welcoming, and visitors feel at home as well. I was struck at the World Central Kitchen service when we did have the three Abrahamic faiths represented on the platform, how crucial it is at this moment to have these relationships with the wars that are going on and the strife within our country, even just around the war in Gaza and the Holy Land. How do you see the cathedral as a beacon of hope for situations like this?
Well, I think we could start probably in many different places, but when we look at the cathedral, and this can be any space, but we do have to begin with the welcoming. Does someone really feel as if the door is open, that you're invited? There's an intentionality, and I know we're all working at it, not claiming to have all the answers, but hopefully someone will see that we're working and we're seeking and we're trying. We're working it out even as we're going, but that the door is open, not that we say, come in and just, it has to be this way, but we're looking to do it together. That's the wonderful blessing of being able to have a space. We all know that there are some individuals who can be invited in a space, but you never feel as if you can move or you can operate. You come in, you sit down, and then you leave. We've all been to homes like that and invited into others' houses where we feel welcome. This great cathedral, this beautiful space, there's a work going on that hopefully resonates to others, and others will continue to hear that you're welcome.
And I think that the selection of a better way as our undergirding theme for this year speaks to that, Joe. A better way to be with one another, a better way to live, a better way to respect. And I find that a very hopeful message that's also grounded in our gospel values. Jesus gave us a mandate that we should love one another as he loved us. And as our presiding bishop in the Episcopal Church, Michael Curry, says, if it's not about love, it's not about God. So I think we try and make as open a welcome as we possibly can, and to try and live into our baptismal covenant to respect the dignity of every human being. That's base.
Jan and Leonard, thank you both so much for joining us today for one of these early podcast episodes so that all people can find their place at the cathedral, because it truly is a house of prayer for all people. We hope that you will join us for our next conversation when we welcome canon historian and Pulitzer Prize-winning author John Meacham. We'll be talking about the role of presidents within the cathedral, and it will be a wonderful conversation, I'm sure. Thank you for listening to Crossroads, and until next time, peace be with you. If the digital offerings of the cathedral enrich your daily life, please consider becoming a supporter today by making a gift at cathedral.org/inspire.